And hello, everyone, again. We are going to do the next few presidents in our tier. And we actually have number four, the fourth president, up on the board. And so far, we have talked about Washington, Adams, and Jefferson. And now we are going to talk about Madison, James Madison. Okay. So Madison has a big time career before becoming commander in chief and the president. He is absolutely instrumental in the writing of the Constitution and in particular the Bill of Rights. As the United States is growing a little bit, you have populism on the rise because Jefferson gives 8 years of kind of a populism light, I would call it, republicanism, and he's appealing to the people. Madison is inclined, as most of the next few presidents will be, toward that viewpoint, and it actually ends up causing some problems for the country. So the lesson to be learned, there's always a balance that's needed in a republic. When one side gets a little bit too strong, the construct of our republic is it's a federal republic, and there has to be balance. And sometimes you have, this pendulum is swinging a little bit far in one way, and it starts swinging a little bit far in the populist direction, and it's going to create a problem, notably the War of 1812. So let's look at that. The issue is really trade is an issue, and not getting involved in European wars, but by trading with Europe, you are going to get involved in the conflict that is happening in Europe due to the Napoleon's movement. France got the sniffles and the rest of Europe got a cold. That's how the saying went. That's what Metternich, Prince of Austria, said about Europe. So Europe is pretty much sneezing, and America kind of gets caught in this because there are, you have trade embargoes going on with Napoleon, the continental system, and the United States it's the background. It's the background noise that's going to kind of get to the United States of America in a way. Increased trade issues as we start having intercourse with Europe and their wars, because we're coming into contact with them, and it's causing some problems with trade. You also have a situation that all these people on the frontier, they want to get space, and there are a lot of natives there, so it's causing problems with the native population. And also Canada is up there, and a lot of people say, wow, Canada, we could you could really get a lot of territory there. And so there's a movement to try to basically annex Canada, which is vastly underpopulated. I mean, the United States is not really populated very heavily, anything at all like it is today. And we still have huge swaths of the country that are not really heavily populated at all. So these issues are going to kind of combine and lead to, along with the impressment of our sailors by the British, this is going to lead in, you have a group called the War Hawks, who are they're led by Henry Clay, who is a frontiers person. And the people in the frontier are really trying to have an assertive policy against the British. And the United States gets caught up in this, and we go to war with Great Britain. It's not one of our best moments. Washington, Adams, and Jefferson had done maybe a little bit better job at keeping out of European affairs and staying clear of it, but it didn't quite happen out this way with Madison. So we go to war, and one of the results of that war is our capital is burned. And Madison is forced to leave the White House, and leave, and he joins the army and actually becomes a field commander during the war. The war does work out in a sense. A treaty is signed, and then we actually have our greatest victory in New Orleans after the war has been over. And Andrew Jackson becomes kind of well known because he leads the forces in New Orleans. They put a pretty good hitting on the British. Madison is more of a states' right kind of guy. One thing he didn't do, he didn't spend any money on infrastructure, and that's kind of the country's growing, and so you do need some of these developments happening. He still is a good president. During the war, he does a pretty good job, and it's good that he leads the troops. He took commander in chief, I guess, quite literally. He becomes again, he's less federalist. He doesn't overuse the executive, and there was a lot of chances for him to do that. And maybe, maybe he could have used that a little bit more as a bully pulpit, like Theodore Roosevelt's later on going to, have the presidency be that bully pulpit. But he doesn't do that, and it works out okay in the end. It's kind of a defining moment for America that we, stand toe to toe with the British, although they sent the junior varsity over because they were far too busy in Europe to deal with us. One of the big differences is that there was two schools of thought that maybe let's fight this war on the sea, which probably fighting against Great Britain on the water is probably not usually. It's one of the maxims I tell people in history is you don't go to land wars in Russia, you don't fight the British on the ocean. Usually doesn't work out well. So the war is fought here. The Canada invasion is an absolute disaster. It's terrible, and it does show one thing about the nature of the American state is that the American state is very expansionist. And very aggressive once they get their ears up. And once their ire is raised, the American tendency is to be an exceptionally aggressive nation, much more than most nations in Europe. Because again, the confines of Europe and the population kind of prohibited that idea of really extreme, you have some examples, but generally speaking, you have a lot of nations there that are rivals, and they might have an occasional problem, but widespread war after Napoleon's wars don't happen. But the United States is it's a growing country, and it's very assertive. All right. But Madison's a B. You could have him as a C. I might change him, but he's pretty solid. So let's go to the next one. The next president is James Monroe, and he's another pretty solid president. And we're going to put him up in the B. He's another Jeffersonian. He has a real quiet kind of administration. There are a couple of things that he is well known for. He's the one that's in the boat with Washington, and he is wounded at the Battle of Trenton. You can actually find him in the boat. I did not pull up the picture, but that could be something if you're interested to do on your little hunt for James Monroe. He is on the boat with Washington in that famous picture of crossing the Delaware. One of the things that is becoming a problem is slavery, and it's really starting to show itself. And you have it's starting to become a problem. Which states are going to be slave states, which are going to be free? Because you're starting to have the rumblings in the north of the abolitionist movement. Now, slavery is increasing in a great deal because of the invention of the cotton gin. Slavery was really on its way out, I think, in a lot of places. It was just not profitable anymore until the cotton gin is invented in 1793. And by 1800, it's totally revolutionized the South. And they have, more of this large scale farming of cotton because of the cotton gin. So it's making it very lucrative, and people in the South are getting boatloads of money if they have large plantations because they can just plant cotton on it. This is becoming a problem. Which areas are going to be free? Missouri, what countries expand now? We're getting out to the Mississippi River. This is how fast America is expanding. And the Missouri Compromise is the first in a long set of compromises to figure out this slavery issue and the equations. And there's an old saying, I'm sure you've heard it, a good sign of a good compromise is both sides are equally miserable. And that is kind of what happens, is neither side is really satisfied, because the problem is that slavery is becoming, and again, slavery is an awful institution. We all know that, now, but unfortunately, and I think people back then knew it too. I just think maybe there was a lot of money in it. More likely it was, what do we do to replace it with? That's the problem. And have this growing agriculture industry and booming income from cotton. I think that's a big part of it, but I think also people knew it was a miserable institution. The Missouri Compromise does exactly what a good compromise does. It makes both sides really unsatisfied. Both leave the table angry. They don't neither get what they want and what they feel they need. And it's basically the can starts rolling, downhill, and into the rut that's going to become the Civil War. Now, slavery is a major factor in the Civil War. It's not the only cause. But what slavery is going to do, it just makes no one want to talk to each other about other things. And it does get intertangled in so many other areas. It's just kind of like, if you're making a cake and you throw like say you mistake sugar for salt, it's such a bad ingredient. It just ruins the entire process of whatever's in the pot. So it's the first step. And what the country is going to end up doing for the next 35, 40 years is kicking that can down the road and trying to not really facing the problem and realizing that the construct of having slavery allowed in states versus having it abolished is a zero-sum argument. And people start realizing it. And it's going to become a real problem. So the Monroe Doctrine is made. Now, on the other hand, it delays a possible civil war in 1820. So if you can buy 40 years of peace with the decision, even though no one's happy with the decision, are you better off? It did give the nation time to kind of come to a solution, but the nation wasn't able to come up with a solution because it's really hard to justify a nation where in your founding documents, you talk about liberty, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And you talk about, the construct that all men are created equal. This was actually brought up by the Haitian Revolution by Tourvier. And he goes to Paris and he says, because the French Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen are very similar to our founding documents. And he says, you have in these documents the ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity, and all these different parts in Dormac. And he says, and yet you have it as slaves, and the hypocrisy of it is on the face. So, and people knew it. Jefferson's talking about this, in the very beginning. They know that there's going to come a reckoning with this, and it's working its way down the road. So Monroe does buy some time. It's not able to be solved. All know, though, he is a pretty good president. It's that era of good feelings are beginning. And again, another Jeffersonian. So you have Jefferson, obviously the original Jeffersonian, then you have Madison and Monroe. And then it's going to change a little bit because our next person coming up is John Quincy Adams. And Adams is the son of John Adams, and we're going to put them right next to each other. He's going to be another C. And again, you can have him maybe a little bit lower. Some people would. I am going to put him higher for one reason. I don't think he's a very effective president in many ways. He's brilliant. He is absolutely sharp as a whip, but he's kind of like his father in the fact that he knows he's the smartest guy in the room, and he is not necessarily that good at listening to others and getting any kind of consensus, kind of like what Washington had done so well. But he has a real brilliant mind. Now, this guy is a strong Federalist, and he's going to really start getting a lot of infrastructure programs moving, which are helpful. Canals, federal roads, things along that line. The problem with him, he's also importantly, he is absolutely the most anti-slavery voice in America in the presidency from the founding until the Civil War, and even more so in many ways than Lincoln. He is profoundly anti-slavery, which of course is increasing the cauldron heat with the South. That and how he comes into the presidency, which is called the corrupt bargain. You basically have a situation where Clay, Calhoun, you have basically a situation where Jackson, Clay, Henry Clay, and Adams are running for presidency. It's an unsure win. No one gets a majority. And it's one of those things where the electoral college is a little higher than the popular vote. And it comes down to basically, and there had been a constitutional crisis with Jefferson's election that also happened where it was actually no one had a majority, and the House of Representatives picked him as the third president. So it's not the first time we've had this type of problem when people, talk about, all these election controversies or close elections. That's as American as apple pie. You have the corrupt bargain, basically, and this is definitely going to lead to the fact that a factor in him not getting elected again, and also some of the regional opposition to his plans. And among those plans are roads and canals, and the North does benefit from these. The Erie Canal, the Cumberland Gap, things like that. These are more in the northern part of the country. Different areas are getting more infrastructure added by the federal government to connect the states as we start expanding. We're already getting out toward Missouri. So you have this situation going on, and the South is not getting as much, but then again, they're not his base of support. So this is, again, more adding to the controversy and the division in the country. Basically he has a term of presidency. He really ticks off Andrew Jackson, and Andrew Jackson, people are going to find out, is a person not to be trifled with when he's angry. He has John Calhoun as his vice president, which is a really unusual mix, because Calhoun's a real firebrand and very much states' rights, protecting slavery. And you have basically this really strong federalist who's anti-slavery in the White House. Clay is the Secretary of State, and that's how Adams gets the presidency. So after he is president, let me go finish this. He constantly is dismissing Jacksonians, but again, his big deal is the infrastructure, which is important. The Cumberland Road is a big deal. The Erie Canal is a huge deal. It opens up the Midwest. You're talking about goods being able to come all the way from Manhattan up the Hudson River through a series of canals to the Erie Canal, and then they can go by boat to Detroit and other places like that along the Great Lakes. So this really opens up the West with and possibilities for the West. One thing he does late in his administration is the Tariff of Abominations, the Tariff of 1828. And this really does have, it's funny, like tariffs versus no tariffs, they each serve a benefit. And kind of the idea is, when do you apply tariff? Because sometimes tariffs, they are a strategy that many presidents have used. Sometimes it's been effective and sometimes it's been ineffective. One thing about tariffs is that it basically tends to hurt the people who can less afford consumer goods that are being consumed, because of the prices being added onto them. So, and again, now he is not a populist, he's a federalist. Tariffs protect industries. All right, they're used to protect industries. And the question, but understanding that whenever you put a tariff on something and it's consumer goods, depending on what's being brought in, it really can put a sock to people who have to work every day and who are not necessarily interested in the investment type thing and the trade aspects. They're more down local, everyday kind of thing going on. It hurts their everyday life. And this is labeled the Tariff of Abominations. It's going to create a lot of problems. He is not reelected. He does serve in the Congress later on, which is kind of interesting. He goes into the House of Representatives later on. So he's a very mixed bag. You could easily have, I think, him as a D, but I don't think he does enough egregious things. And I honestly do feel just the first voice and the freshness of someone really from the White House, talking about slavery and having that straight talk moment. And this is 30 years before the Civil War. So there was time to address it, but it just was not addressed. But you have to give credit where it's due. So let's go to the next president, and boy, oh boy, here he comes, Andrew Jackson. All right. Andrew Jackson, he got his claim to fame being a tough guy early, when he is slashed in the face by a British officer for not doing a good job shining his shoes, and he wore that as a badge of pride. This guy is someone not to be trifled with in his personal life or his political life. He is definitely not an elitist. Now, he was not opposed to slavery, but he hated the slave owning class, because he had become a wealthy man through different means, not through planting. So even though he's a very wealthy man, he identifies more with like the poor people from that Appalachia, that frontier region, and of course the South. He really identifies very well with them. He speaks their language. He acts like he's one of them. And he was considered at a few years ago, when I was doing grad work, and I was taking history courses in graduate school. He was considered in the top 10 of presidents. And right now he's in many groups, he's in the 20s. He's not in that top tier anymore. And a lot of it, I think, is because some of the things he's done are interpreted differently by historians today, and that's neither good nor bad. It's just how it is. People's view changes, and some of the things are very disturbing. So let's talk about them. One is he kind of gold is found in the southeast United States in the mountains in Appalachia, where all again you have these poor settlers moving in trying to scrabble, and these are lands held by tribal nations. Gold is found in there, and you can guess what happens next. You probably know. Using the power of the federal government, he orders them out. They have to be evacuated. This is going to lead to all sorts of headache and heartache over the next 8 to 10 years. Many leave right away. They just say, okay, we see the writing on the wall, but some stay, and those are the ones who are going to be going through the Trail of Tears. And it's actually, you can actually say they're trails of tears, because each group kind of had their own route. Each nation, and there are several nations that are removed from the southeast United States, and they end up going to Oklahoma, or Indian Territory as was called. And this was a very difficult road for them. But it has two phases. You have some that left early and some that stayed until they were removed after Jackson's presidency also. He really does a number on the separation of powers. He is not at all afraid to use the power of the office, or his perceived power of the office. And the Supreme Court basically says that, some of the legislation regarding these things are not constitutional, and he just ignores them. It's almost like, if you know ancient history, Pompey Maximus says, when will the politicians realize they can't talk with the ones who are holding the swords? And in a sense, that's kind of a good analogy to what Jackson's doing. He does not, and the separation of powers is really threatened. This is a constitutional crisis. That he's saying, no, this is what I feel the executive branch feels need, and you got Congress to act with it, Supreme Court as that, again, that balance, holding the balance of power and separation of powers, to kind of where each branch of government can check each other. Well, he's not going to let the Supreme Court do its constitutional function, and that is a big deal. And you have to, the fact that it worked doesn't make that what he did as a real unconstitutional act. And it's a different thing that you can see a tangible benefit in Jefferson's, and it could be open for interpretation on Jefferson's action with the Louisiana Purchase. Jackson was creating a constitutional crisis because of his reaction, because, he's saying, I have the weapons, I have the armed forces behind me, and, I'm not going to let you guys in Europe stop me. So this is a constitutional crisis. Obviously, the trail of, again, the removal and diaspora of the native people from this land is also, something that I think we are much more sensitive in the last 25 years than we were when I was, again, 25 years ago when I was studying this. Actually, it's more like 30 as time goes by. Like 30 years ago when I was studying, when I was taking grad work in history in particular. Jackson was really thought of much higher by academia at that time, and it's really pivoted over the year. And that's again, these things happen, and I always find that I just use the term, it's interesting because you never know what event is going to make someone in vogue or make them unpopular. So basically, but other things that he does he does take on the national bank, which is a good thing because it was getting out of control. And Andrew Jackson's presidency, with his budget work and reining in the banks, it is the last time in the United States history that the United States has not had a deficit. So he did balance the budget. He did rein in the banks because they're hurting the populace movement. They're hurting the small guys, and they're benefiting one group of the people of the nation, and not the people and the majority of the people. So he's, again, very much of the banks, which have been running amok. He's an apologist for slavery, or he just didn't mention it, but he doesn't like the slave owning class. He is definitely from the West, and he's the first Westerner as president of the United States, and it represents this rough-edged populism. And I remember I did a paper way back, again, like 30 years ago, and I actually drew a cartoon. I'm not the greatest artist, but I put Andrew Jackson on a surfboard riding the wave of populism, and my professor kind of thought that was pretty cool, that I was a hand sketch thing that I put in my paper, and he got it, and we talked about it, and he did definitely ride this wave. I think he is probably, I would say, the mentally and physically the toughest president of the United States we've had. This guy was not going to change his mind. And if you didn't change your mind, it was his mindset was he wasn't going to change. He just ignored you and just didn't bother with you. He didn't care. That's not necessarily a good trait in a leader. Again, it can be, but it can also be very much disastrous. And again, this is again why he's being taken away from. I think the idea of the rough, tough individualist that was seen as a very positive thing in history, especially in Americans, is changing. It's the view has changed, the culture is changing. So that's him. Now, one thing where this tough as it nails thing does come in that we have to give him credit for is nullification. South Carolina has he makes a ruling and South Carolina doesn't like it. He says, well, if South Carolina doesn't like it, we're not going to do it. We're going to nullify it. And Andrew Jackson says, you know, over my dead body or over your dead bodies, you'll ignore it. I'm the president of the United States. It's a federal thing. And he takes it very seriously. And South Carolina realizes that he's taking it seriously. And you know, you have South Carolina showing its idea that they feel that they're going to do what's right for themselves with a real harsh independent streak. And Jackson is able to nip it in the bud by doing so. Now, one thing that the bank, by vetoing bank bills did is it did cause a panic and the downfall in the economy. It's called the Panic of 1837. That is the price to pay because there were some issues and his policies with the bank did disrupt the economics. A lot going on here. I mean, and this guy I kind of struggled on. I mean, I had him, if, you know, I'll be honest, I would have probably had him as like an A 30 years ago. But I think what was mentioned more was his toughness, his ability to be a kind of expansionist, his bringing more people into the franchise, a sense with you know, by getting people feeling like they're engaged in the state and have a stake in the nation. But at what cost? This guy did cause a constitutional crisis. He has very little nuance, and you know, he is just old hickory, and he would use it. I would have had him maybe as like an A 30 years ago. Part of me wants to have him as a B, but with Mr. Hickory, I'm going to probably put him in the C, and maybe depending on what side of the bed I make up, he might be in a B, but I'm going to put him in the C because I think you've lost a lot in Jefferson's brand of populism. And as it's evolved over these three presidents, Jackson's brand of populism. And on that note, we are going to close out today's broadcast. So we've gone through 7 presidents, but no real duds. I mean, all of them have impact on the nation. And again, we're looking here. I don't want to judge them too much by today's standards, what in contemporary times, and that might bring me back to move Jackson up to a B, for example. And also it might move a John Adams and a Quincy Adams down to a D, you see. So you try to balance this with, you know, what were their effects and import at that time, and how do we see them now in the big page of history? I think they shaped the nation, and Jackson especially shapes the nation. And in something that I think we've kind of realized this might be a problem in America, our perceptions of the power of the executive, runaway populism, because at times when it's runaway populism, that's what was going on in the French Revolution and the Reign of Terror and other parts, and people get hurt in these things. So have a great day. I hope to see you again soon.